start with the overview of the challenge of what we're trying to address, how WWF sees the world and freshwater challenges. It's really twin intertwined challenges. First, a dramatic decline of freshwater biodiversity of ecosystems. We just released a report called the Living Planet Report that shows there's been an 84% decline in monitored populations of freshwater dependent species since 1970. So a very alarming trend. But the intertwined challenge is that it's also a challenge for people. Almost half the world's population will be living in areas of high water stress by 2030. And so our approach is that we believe that preserving, restoring these freshwater resources and ecosystems, and so it's water as a resource and freshwater ecosystems together is really essential to how the world can meet sustainable development goals while living within planetary boundaries. So we focus on strategies like promoting good governance, looking at the systems of how the world works, so sustainable energy, regenerative ag, water stewardship, working with the financial sector to influence financial flows towards innovative and nature-based solutions, and convening private and public sector actors together. And these are our primary initiatives. But I'll just jump right into something that I just mentioned about influencing financial flows towards innovative nature-based solutions. And why do we need nature-based solutions? Well, what is the need for adaptation? So just thinking about one aspect of water, water risk, and there are many. This is focusing on water scarcity. We could talk about flooding, water quality, but already approximately 4 billion people live in areas that have water scarcity. Now, this may be not permanent water scarcity, could be seasonal, but there already at some point during the year, there is water stress. With 2 degrees of warming, an additional 410 million people would be exposed to water scarcity. With 1.5 degrees of warming, an additional 350 million would be exposed. This shows a couple things. One, it shows that that there actually is a difference between 1.5 and 2. And so every 1/10 of a degree counts. If we can do better at holding warming, we can really make a difference in people's lives. But second, even if we achieve full success, so the 1.5 degree target, I know a lot of people think it's already beyond reach, but the 1.5 degree target would be absolute success. Even that results in 350 million additional people exposed to water scarcity. So it shows that even if we're successful, we need successful in climate mitigation, we need significant climate adaptation investments. So nature-based solutions as a way to adapt to climate change and its hydrological impacts. What are nature-based solutions? Well, first, how are they different from just nature protection? Well, the primary thing is they have to directly and effectively address one or more societal challenge, such as flooding or drought or water quality degradation. But they do it through an ecosystem or an ecosystem process to address that challenge: management, protection, restoration of ecosystems. And they generally deliver simultaneous benefits to people, other benefits, co-benefits that include benefits to communities and benefits to nature and biodiversity. So here we'll be focusing on the nature-based solutions that are directed towards our water challenges, water scarcity. So these are the challenges that nature-based solutions can be directed towards: water scarcity, degradation of water quality, flood risk, stormwater and urban floods, and coastal erosion and floods. And I'll just be able to touch on a little bit of this, of course, in this quick pitch format. Just today, in fact, about a half an hour ago at COP27, we launched this report called Waterways to Resilience about nature-based solutions for adaptation in Africa. And the next few slides that I show will be drawn from this report. This was done in conjunction with our partners AB InBev and the African Development Bank. And so what we do is we define a set of these challenges, water challenges to Africa, and then we examine the evidence base for how nature-based solutions can address them. So here's a map. We used a tool that WWF has produced called the Water Risk Filter that shows different levels of water risk. And so this shows water scarcity risk in Africa, current, water scarcity risk, and the hatched lines are where, with our current trajectory, where water scarcity risk is anticipated to increase. And this is the number of people today that are affected by water scarcity, and then the number projected to be affected by 2050. And you see it's about 25% or about 30% projected. So it's not a dramatic increase in the number of people projected to be affected by water risk, but it's still a fairly high proportion. But it's a much higher proportion of GDP. So it's about 40% of GDP that's projected to be affected by water scarcity in Africa. And it's about 40% in 2050. Now, it's a proportion, so it's the same proportion, although because GDP is projected to increase in Africa, it's a much higher amount of GDP that will be at risk from water scarcity. The amount projected of the number of people projected to be affected by water quality degradation, that will increase dramatically, the proportion from about 25% today to about 82%. And flood risk is also projected to increase. So these are the 20 biggest cities in Africa. And you can see each circle is scaled to the size of the city. And the left side of the circle is today's risk, and the right side of the circle is risk in 2050 with the current trajectory. And you can see about half of the cities are projected to have an increase in flood risk. And most of the cities are in medium, high, and very high risk already. And the proportion of people in Africa, therefore, will also increase quite dramatically from about a quarter today to more than half of people in Africa to be affected. Now, nature-based solutions, I'm just going to talk about one. So protection or restoration of forest lands can provide a range of benefits to these water challenges. So moving from situations like this to situations like that. And we looked at two sources of evidence to review for how nature-based solutions can effectively address water management challenges. And I'll just jump into those. So reviewed by Ackerman et al. For example, we looked at how the change in forest cover can affect changes in sediment. So along the x-axis, you have increasing loss of forest cover as you move from right to left up to 100% loss of forest cover. And on the y-axis, you have increases in sediment yield. So even at 20% loss of forest cover, it's about a 50% increase in sediment yield. Moving towards 40 to 80%, you can see a 200 to 400% increase in sediment yield. So forests are directly related to the sediment that gets into water. Forests also reduce flood risk. This is drawing from the Oxford database evidence platform, where the green shows the number of studies that found a positive impact. So you can see that restoration and protection of forests in particular had a strong positive impact. Most studies found that it had a strong positive impact on reducing flood risk. And water availability is more complicated. If you look just at created forest, it actually has a negative impact on water availability. That's generally because of planting plantations in areas that didn't normally have trees, and they evapotranspire more water. But a smaller number of studies that looked at restoration and protection of native forests did find that there was a positive effect on water availability from protecting and restoring native forests. And I'm just going to skip ahead. I realize I'm over time. The one key thing about nature-based solutions is they can draw on diverse funding sources, everything from purely social and philanthropic up to purely profit. You can look at the report for how we discuss this. And just to conclude, just a real simple example, restoring forests can draw on mitigation funding for carbon sequestration, conservation funding because they're protecting biodiversity, and adaptation funding because of all the benefits that I've just been describing. So I'd encourage you to look at this report, and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
First question, where can we find your paper?
Oh, yes, it just came out. So somebody sent me the URL this morning, and I didn't work it into my slides. Would it be okay if I put that into the chat?
Please, and we'll make sure to share that with the audience. Anyone here with a question for Jeff? Okay. Yes. Jeff, could you hear the question, or would you like
No,
me to repeat?
no,
Okay,
if you
I'll
could
repeat
repeat
it.
it.
I'm going to do my best. The difference between protecting existing, like I think you mentioned forests there, versus creating new freshwater protection environments. What are some of the puts and takes, I guess, of one versus the other? Did I translate that okay? Okay.
What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of one versus the other? Or
Yes.
well, I think I'll just pick up a bit on that trend of where the studies showed that reforestation often led to a decrease in water availability. And this is something that people have been concerned about when people talk about the Trillion Trees initiative, and very common to talk about initiatives to plant lots of trees as a carbon sequestration and carbon mitigation strategy. And people have pointed out that when trees are planted in areas that did not originally have trees, they actually can be they will consume more water than the native vegetation that was there before, and actually can reduce stream flow and reduce water availability to ecosystems and people. So it's suggesting a real care is needed for when planning tree planting, and if water is a concern, to be really thinking about what was there, what are the native vegetation, native trees, etc. But working with native trees and restoration protection of native forests, interestingly, there might still be an overall decline in water, but a lot of that is a decline in flood flows, but an increase in low flows, because trees and a healthy forested watershed acts like a sponge, so it's absorbing water during periods of high flow, and it's releasing water during dry periods. And still, the evapotranspiration may mean that trees evapotranspire more than, say, grasses, but they have an effect on the low flow that can be quite beneficial.
Jeff, not nearly enough time for such an important piece of work, so we look forward to sharing with everyone, and thanks for taking time out of what must be a very busy day for you. So I'm going to turn over.
Just one thing, I can't put it into the chat, so maybe I'll email it to somebody and they can put it in the chat.
We'll put it in there. Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Next, I'm going to turn to Talua Lutkin with Global Water Intelligence. She's the Utility Performance Editor, and GWI, in partnership with GIZ, Xylem, and Cambry, as well as others that I'm sure she'll mention, just launched a new white paper this week, Mapping Water's Carbon Footprint. Talua, take it away.
Hi, thanks so much, Hassan. I'm Talua. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Utility Performance Editor at Global Water Intelligence. And I'm just really excited to be here today because we've had some great discussions. The utility panel was great. I've got so much to take from that. Recently my focus has really been a lot on the carbon footprint of water and wastewater. So I'm just going to be showing you some of the work that we've been doing in that space recently. A really quick overview of GWI for those of you who don't know us. First and foremost, we're a media organization. We report on news from the water sector worldwide, but we do see ourselves as more than that, sort of the leading source of not just news, but information, data, analysis, opinion of the global water sector. Have a monthly magazine, market research platform, a number of networking groups like Leading Utilities of the World. A few of the utilities on the panel earlier are part of that group. And then we bring all those water networks together during our international conferences. So as I said, the carbon footprint of the water sector is really sort of coming to the fore. I just got back from COP27 last night about 3 a.m, so I hope I'm not looking too bad. But it's really exciting to see the water pavilion there and that those conversations around water are happening. But we at GWI felt that there was a lack of data and a lack of consolidated information about this and about what people are doing. So we wanted to work on that through our Water Without Carbon initiative. And we've consolidated that onto our landing page, which is the link that you can see here. So I encourage you to screenshot that link, take a picture, jot it down. I'll have another slide with it later. The two main initiatives of Water Without Carbon are the Net Zero Observatory, where we've been tracking water and wastewater utilities worldwide who have made a commitment to carbon neutrality. So far, we found 81 utilities. We're in the process of doing now the sweep at the moment in the context of COP, so hopefully we'll find a few more. But yeah, I recommend you to go and check the Net Zero Observatory. It's sort of a spreadsheet. You can see all the information on the utilities. But really the magnum opus, I would say, of this Water Without Carbon is the white paper that we've just published on Monday from Egypt for Water Day at COP. It presents our data model estimating the greenhouse gas emissions of global water infrastructure. The white paper is called Mapping Water's Carbon Footprint. It was supported, as Austin said, by Xylem and Canby. So really great thanks to them. And the data itself was peer reviewed by GIZ and by the Climate Policy Initiative. And it's also available to download through that link. All the resources you need are there. So what I'm going to do is just really briefly share with you some of the main findings of the research, because it's really quite groundbreaking as far as we're aware. Nobody has modeled the emissions of the sector quite so thoroughly yet. So yeah, really exciting to sort of kickstart that conversation. So we estimate that water infrastructure generates 847 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually. And this amounts to about 1.8% of global emissions, and that's roughly the same as the aviation industry, just to put that into perspective. But the most important thing that our research shows is that direct emissions from wastewater and sanitation are actually a serious liability for the sector to achieve decarbonisation. So what we wanted to do with this paper is really to shift the conversation from water and energy, that water and energy nexus, which is still important, to water and emissions, and to be able to incorporate those direct emissions of methane and nitrous oxide. So yeah, and as you can see here, so the water sector, as I said, is 1.8% of CO2, but it's almost 5% of methane emissions. And that's really quite significant, especially when you know that methane is particularly potent in the short term. So cutting those methane emissions really could help us quickly alleviate some of the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing across the world. And so all these direct emissions, so of nitrous oxide and methane, come from the wastewater and on sanitation side. On the drinking water side, it's purely energy. And yes, water is energy intensive, but there are a lot of solutions, as we heard from the utility panel earlier. Utilities are implementing them to become more energy efficient, to produce green energy. And so at GWI, we sort of think that we hope that the curve is starting to bend and that utilities are well on the way to curbing and finding solutions and implementing solutions for their energy emissions. But the emissions from wastewater and on-site sanitation, those are only set to increase. Wastewater treatment build-out is really booming, especially in Asia, in Latin America. On-site sanitation as well is really increasing in the race to achieve SDG 6. And nutrient removal processes, which are a big trigger for nitrous oxide emissions, as we heard, are also on the rise kind of across the world as governments are looking to limit nutrient pollution even more in the effluents. We've sort of seen that from the European Union really recently. So as you can see, these direct emissions of nitrous oxide and methane make up half of the sector's emissions. And we think that this is actually probably an underestimate, as a lot of the emissions aren't sufficiently measured. For example, there's a lack of data on methane in closed sewers, which we weren't able to include just because there isn't enough information. But from some of the conversations we've had and initial research, we think that it could be really quite significant. And also on the sanitation side, although we're already estimating that it's maybe a third of the sector's emissions, measurement is still really patchy, so that could also probably be an underestimate. So we really think that this shift to a conversation towards direct emissions from wastewater and sanitation, it needs to happen. It needs to happen urgently, and that's really the way that utilities are really going to achieve net zero and fully decarbonize. Another quick snippet from our paper is the correlation between methane emissions from sanitation and achieving SDG 6. So we did a little bit of modeling here to see what the impact in terms of methane emissions would be for achieving safe sanitation for all, so ending open defecation. Because we currently consider that open defecation is sort of zero carbon, but obviously it's really absolutely essential for so many reasons to end it. Reasons related to health, economic development, security, safety for women, human dignity. I mean, there's no way this can continue. But doing that is going to mean a stronger reliance on on-site sanitation systems. It's not really realistic for everyone to be connected to a sewer by 2030. And with current practices, that is going to emit a lot of methane. So if we continue current trends of sewer and on-site build-out, we're not going to achieve SDG 6 by 2030. Trends suggest that 230 million people will still be practicing open defecation by then. And in that scenario, methane emissions will also increase by 100 million tons of CO2e. And along the bottom there, you can see two scenarios where we are able to achieve SDG 6. The first one assumes that all people currently practicing open defecation will be on-site sanitation by 2030. And in this scenario, methane emissions still increase by 50 tons of CO2e. The second scenario assumes everyone's connected to a sewer by 2030. The resulting methane emissions will probably be a lot less, but this doesn't include energy and nitrous oxide, so that's something to consider. Obviously, wastewater treatment and sewers have those emissions as well. So I think the takeaway from this is firstly to be aware of the correlation between sanitation and emissions. But also what I want to emphasize here, it's really important, is that the solutions to improve sanitation and to achieve that SDG 6 are things like reliable service change, making these solutions climate resilient to floods, that kind of thing, and having sort of sustainable systems. Those are the same solutions that can help mitigate those methane emissions from sanitation. So there's really an opportunity here to sort of combine sanitation and greenhouse gas mitigation for sanitation to become a driver in terms of climate finance as well, to really blend those two issues of achieving sanitation and mitigating emissions. So these are the two highlights of the paper I really wanted to share with you today, but I just really encourage you to go and download it. There's so much more information in there about green energy that utilities are doing, about methane, about nitrous oxide, more about on-site sanitation solutions than I could possibly say in 8 minutes. So yeah, go to that link, download the white paper. We also conducted a webinar on Monday with a really great panel with Xylem, with Cambi, Watch.org and GIZ. The recording is going to be available again through that link. Maybe not today, I think it's going to be available tomorrow. Our team's working hard on that. So yeah, please go check it out. Share the link with your colleagues, with your partners. We really want to sort of get the information out there on this. And just to wrap up, this research is also going to feature in a session at our American Water Summit, which has our next conference happening in January in LA. There's still an early bird rate there until tomorrow, so if you'd like to come join us, hear about that and lots of other sessions that we've got on rethinking water. So we're going to be talking about desal, we're going to talk about reuse, we're going to be talking about industrial water positivity. So yeah, so please do come along, and yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I hope I'm time. I have no idea what time I started, but yeah, thanks very much.
Talua, thank you so much. I'm impressed. 3 a.m. last night from Egypt. Last time I spoke to her was at that webinar on Monday, and she was in front of a nice pool in Egypt. So glad to see her back home. Really important piece of work. I have that paper printed out with notes all throughout it. It's a really must read. Any questions here in the audience? Otherwise, I'm going to keep it going. Great. Okay. Our next is Daniela. She is with IWA. Daniela are you on the screen? Great, getting there. Okay, great, thanks. Great, good to see you. There you are. So Daniela, we've asked you to talk about IWA's really important initiative, Climate Smart Utilities. I think probably one of the leading programs, although I'm a bit biased, on highlighting water, wastewater utilities and creating a community of practice. So Daniela, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, rock and roll.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Austin, for this opportunity for IWA to present our Climate Smart Utilities initiative that you know so well, and we are very excited to be able to present to a broader audience. So initially, for those who are not familiar with the International Water Association, we are the largest membership association for the global water sector, with over 8,000 members from around 140 countries. Our members, they organize themselves in 50 specialist groups covering all areas of water-related technology and water management. These SGs provide an opportunity for experts from different geographies to network and to collaborate. So they organize conferences, online events, and they also co-develop publications. Then association also organized two major events, the World Water Congress, the last one was in Copenhagen in September, and the Water Development Congress. The next one will be next year in Kigali, Rwanda. And we also have IWA Publishing, which publishes around over 50 books, per year, and 19 journals, including Water Research, which is the #1 journal on water science. Through our programs, we develop projects and initiatives aiming at establishing change agendas on key water-related themes, and so contribute to develop and promote sustainable urban and basin-related water solutions. Today's presentation is about one of our most active initiatives, the Climate Smart Utilities. So climate change is currently recognized as the main threat to the future of humankind, we can say. And the urban water sector, although strongly affected by the impacts of climate change, also contributes to the problem, as we have been discussing now. So although the change in precipitation patterns, for instance, or sea level rise can affect the capacity of delivering safe water and sanitation and protect people and assets from flooding, also, utilities, as shown before, are responsible for up to 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions, mostly related to wastewater handling and the high energy consumption. So even aware of that, utilities, or some utilities, tend to be cautious in embracing mitigation and adaptation strategies. This can be due to many factors, including, for instance, the complexity of the operations, some institutional culture, existing and planned long-term investments that didn't consider climate change, regulations that are too restrictive that need to be met, governance arrangements that sometimes do not easily allow integration of adaptation and mitigation measures. So it's in this context, and building on the legacy of the WACLIN project, was a GIZ IWA partnership that developed the eCam tool, which is a platform, an online platform for utilities to assess their carbon emissions. IWA developed the Climate Smart Utilities Initiative. And the aim of this initiative is to support water, wastewater, and stormwater companies from around the globe in improving their climate resilience, while also inspiring the wider water professional community about this topic. So the initiative is structured in around 4 key components. The first one is a community of practice around adaptation and mitigation. The idea is to support bridging science and practice and trigger the needed cultural shifts and actions. So in the last 2 years, IWA has organized online meetings that provided opportunity for professionals from different geographies to share their experiences, to discuss their common problems and potential solutions to be adopted or already adopted. The second component is a web platform, which is an online space to share resources and to contribute to the dissemination of the change agenda. One of the resources available in this platform is the eCam tool that I mentioned before. The third component is a utility leaders exchange platform to drive decision-making towards climate smart. So in this sense, one of the key topics addressed, for instance, during the Utility Leaders Forum that happened during our last World Water Congress in Copenhagen, was the need for utilities to embrace adaptation and mitigation agenda. So this was advocate among utility leaders, not only, let's say, the technical level. And finally, the last component is a climate smart utility vision and a recognition program to raise and increase awareness and to inspire utilities for progress on their journey to become fully climate smart. So the climate smart vision was developed with the support of some utility members, IWA members, from many different countries, developing and developed countries. And the idea is to increase awareness and to encourage utilities to include climate change in their current agendas, not just for the future. So the vision is open for endorsements. It's available in our website. In my last slide, I leave the links. And anyone can endorse it. And by endorsing it, utilities and water professionals in general can act as champions, providing inspiration and momentum for all utilities to achieve the cultural shift needed. We consider in this vision 3 interconnected pillars: adaptation, mitigation, and leadership in this field. So far, we have received 46 endorsements from utilities, and around 16 or 17 countries were represented in this endorsement. Finally, the recognition program. The 2022 IWA Climate Smart Utilities Recognition Program was supported by Ireland, was launched in April 2022 to encourage utilities to showcase concrete actions they are taking to improve their climate resilience. So we asked for the narratives of projects or actions taken in the last few years with results that could be showcased. A total of 56 applications were received from 34 different countries, and they presented narratives related to the 3 pillars mentioned before: mitigation, adaptation, and/or leadership. Considering a framework defined by IWA of what is a climate smart utility, a jury established that 42 of the 56 applications submitted were sound and worth to be shared with the broad IWA community. These utilities were announced and celebrated at the 2022 World Water Congress as Climate Smart. It was a very nice celebration in Copenhagen. From this group of the 42 climate smart utilities, the jury considered 26 as exceptional in the sense that the actions undertaken are inspiring and ambitious. Of course, this was defined considering their local context. So those utilities were invited to share the experiences with the broad water sector through what we are calling climate smart stories. Some of the stories are already available in our website, and others will be published soon. The narratives submitted like some lessons learned from those narratives. They provided us, they were not like a formal sample, but they provided us kind of an overview, a helicopter view or an overview of how utilities around the globe are currently dealing with climate change. We have utilities from very different geographies, and some key points that we could highlight as lessons taken from those stories are that the great majority of applications received were from developed countries, as expected. The utilities in developed countries and developing countries are taking climate action at very different levels of complexity. It was very clear that the developing countries' narratives had a focus on planning activities, while the developed countries' activities were more related to concrete actions, especially related to implementation of new technologies. And even when an application from a developing country was describing some concrete actions, those were not in the same level. They were usually less sophisticated, let's say, compared to the actions presented by developed countries. Last, also in most narratives we received from developing countries, there was always a developing sector partner, such as GIZ or the World Bank or IDB, that had been involved either at a financial or at a capacity building level. So although these conclusions are based on a very small sample, it was not like planned to be a research, but we understand that there's a clear high income, low income country gap, indicating that the framework conditions, especially those related to financial capacity and good governance, are key to foster and to take forward climate adaptation and mitigation measures within utilities. So considering that, one of IWA next challenges is to advance this discussion within our members and partners to make sure that Global South utilities are also encouraged to start their journey towards becoming climate smart. We are also planning to launch in the coming months the 2023 recognition program, and hopefully expanding even more the scope of the program and its geographical outreach. I invite you all to learn more about this initiative and eventually join the community of practice and maybe endorse the vision through the initiative website. I leave here also my email address. If you want to receive more detailed information, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Austin.
Daniela, thank you as always. Do we have any questions for her on the Climate Smart Utilities Program? Any utilities that are tuning in, I seriously encourage you to look at the 2023 recognition program. It really was impressive in Copenhagen to hear all the different approaches to mitigation, adaptation, and leadership. While it's the same challenges, there's a lot of different approaches, and it's great to see them recognizing that. All right, we have one more in our quick pitch format coming live from Egypt. Claire Seward, Global Campaigns Director for WaterAid. So Claire, over to you.
Hi, thank you for having me today. I'm not sharing slides because I'm having to do this on local Wi-Fi, and I just don't think I could cope, the system could cope, anyone could cope. So let's see how we do, and I hope it holds. There are two things I really wanted to talk about today that have been particularly coming up at COP that I think are really worth exploring with you. The first is around water security. And what do we mean by water security? And I think it's very notable that this is the first year that there has been a water day at COP. And it's only the second year there's been even a water pavilion. And I think it really speaks to the fact that water is everywhere and nowhere in the climate discussion. So that's the first thing. And I think in terms of where we're coming at this from WaterAid, there are two aspects to this. One is from a locally led adaptation approach, which is really about people. And it's about the fact that you cannot have water security without people having access to the water and sanitation hygiene they need to stay healthy. Because without people, you don't have farm laborers. Without people being healthy, you don't have people who are working in industry. You don't have people who are working in the health system. You don't have people going to school. So how to make sure people are at the heart of that? And I think what's been really striking is that we've really seen this come out at COP this week in terms of the local adaptation principles around how do we have adaptation solutions for water that are really close to the ground, and also involving the communities in those solutions. And it's been really striking to see that women and water being women's business, the fact that young people are 50% of the global population, and the fact that indigenous solutions are coming back onto the table a lot more than they used to be as well, around both mitigation and adaptation, are really part of that conversation. I think the other part that I wanted to raise with you is a piece of work that we've been looking at as part of WaterAid's contribution to the conversation around water security, around groundwater. I think it's been really exciting about this COP and the conversations we're having is how it's bringing together nature-based solutions like Jeff has spoken about, around energy, around water resource management, around biodiversity, but it's also bringing the water and sanitation hygiene that people need, which is the bit that we contribute as an organization. And we launched just ahead of COP this year a groundwater report, which looked at drought factors over Africa over the last 40 years. We worked with the Bristol University in the UK, and really looked at the fact that some countries have up to 40% of their land mass is becoming drier. And we're particularly seeing that in countries in Central, South and East Africa, with countries like Somalia, Sudan, South Africa, South Sudan and Namibia being some of the hardest hit. However, on the plus side of what is a grim picture is also there are actually quite large groundwater reserves that can be tapped and used, and if used well and carefully, could provide up to 5 years worth of relief from drought for people in those communities, often whom are the least able to access the water. So this provides learning and opportunities to try and find a way forward in an adaptation space. The second thing I really wanted to talk to you about is around climate financing, and it's come up a little bit already. We've been doing a lot of analysis on this as an issue. And really circulating around several things. One is that there are several challenges. 92% of climate finance at the moment goes to mitigation. And this has been very much an adaptation COP and an African adaptation COP. And so that's been something that's come to the fore a lot. And the second one is only 3% of global climate finance actually goes to water at the moment, which, given how fundamental it is to underpin everything, you would think would have more, but that's not the case. And so we've been trying to look at why that is and what can be done to unlock climate financing to support adaptation measures to make sure, as other people in this quickfire session have said, to make sure that water and sanitation can be available to people, whether there's drought or there's flood, and the increasingly extreme weather people have to face. And we've kind of seen three challenges that have arisen around this. One is that just the lack of data on the water conditions on the ground and the impacts climate change is having on that to be putting into high quality proposals. And for those of us who've worked in the water sector for quite some time will know the frustrations around trying to access that data, but it is a fundamental blockage we do need to overcome. The second is having a comprehensive approach to systemic water issues. And coming back to what I said before about water being everywhere and nowhere and the need to be working cross-sectorally, particularly at national level. And we're seeing this in the NDC and NAP space, where some countries we're seeing really good examples of how WASH as part of wider water is going into NDCs and NAPs. But we're also seeing a lot of countries where that's not the case. A good example being Ethiopia recently, who has redone, and Bangladesh, who have both redone their NAPs and NDCs and have been able to put that in a quite profound and strong way. But in countries, say, like Mozambique at the moment, where actually you look at the analysis and it's completely divorced on climate and water, and we still aren't making those connections. The third is just the complex financing landscape that has to be navigated. And that is about how do we make sure that countries have the support they need to be able to properly access the climate financing opportunities there. And also that climate financing is more flexible to reflect the changes that are happening on the ground. There's been some really inspiring conversations this week at COP coming from city mayors or county governors who are talking about their experiences of floods and drought and the life changes that they need to make in how they respond to these situations, and needing to have more flexible financing from, say, the multi-development banks or even from the climate funds that are out there more broadly to reflect those changes and how do they adapt to that. One of the things that we are looking at as WaterAid to tackle those myriad of challenges that are there is really to look at something we launched called the Resilient Water Accelerator. It's an initiative that's bringing together a number of private sector, water experts, NGO organizations like ourselves, as well as governments, to incubate countries that can put together some really strong proposals for how to make water how to have more resilient water and water services in countries in order to be able to better respond to or bounce back from climate shocks. And putting those together, those proposals, and using it to unlock a combination of private and public financing, and really trying to do this together. Bank of America is one of the organizations we have involved in this, and they've been incredibly helpful in how do we frame this challenge going forwards. We've been able to start piloting this work in Bangladesh and Nigeria as two countries to be putting together the proposals. And there was a really useful conversation at COP, and we're hoping we'll follow at the UN Water Conference next year on this, in terms of how do we start to use millions to unlock the billions that are going to be needed to have strong and resilient services. They are the main things I wanted to talk through. Just to jump back a little bit, just to explain who we are, which I probably should have done at the start, that would have been helpful. So WaterAid is an organization. It's a non-government organization. We work in 25 countries, particularly across Africa and Asia, as well as a little bit in Latin America. And we really look at how to make sure that people, the poorest and most marginalized people, have access to the water and sanitation hygiene they need. And we use a model of WASH system strengthening to do that. And that is the tool that we use to reflect that it's not just about the infrastructure, it's not even about the software that goes with it. It's about the fact that you need to have the governance, the cross-sectoral working, you need to have the environmental analysis, the finance, the gender and inequalities impacts. And it's about how do we make sure that we have a strong WASH system in place as a whole, and how do we make sure that that is set up in a way that's fit for the future to enable people not only just to get by, but to actually thrive in what is going to be quite a challenging environmental context. And we're quite new, I think, it's safe to say, to the water and climate nexus space, but it's really come from just the fact and the reflections from our programming on the ground, which we do with local organisations, on how the climate change is exposing the fractures in sometimes quite fragile WASH systems, and really exposing the gaps that it's providing. And I think it's a really important part of our conversation to actually come into the water and climate space and be able to talk about what does this mean for people, how to make sure the WASH services in place are not only resilient but can respond, reflecting that sometimes you're never going to have something that's going to withstand a flood or a cyclone, but we need to make sure it bounces back quickly to make sure that people can have the health that they need, to make sure they remain economically active as quickly as they can. So I'll stop there. I'm pretty sure that's my 10 minutes.
Claire, thank you. I have a question for you. Being in Egypt, glass half empty or glass half full on the proceedings that you're seeing so far?
Until about an hour ago, I was glass half empty. It's been really positive to see the loss and damage text being agreed. And I think that's a really important testament to the fact this is an African COP. This is about climate justice, and it's been taken forward in a way that's progress. And I think it's critical that the role, the importance of what's happening on people being recognised in that way. I mean, I think overall we're still a long way from where we need to be. Adaptation financing is woefully behind. The 100 billion is not only not met, but now also out of date and needs to be far bigger. So we've not necessarily seen that stepping up to the plate on the financing side that we need to see. The mitigation space has obviously been a very difficult place. I think this has been an interesting COP in the sense that it was never meant to be a big COP. It was meant to be a kind of progress COP. I think what we've seen is actually a strong agenda coming from people on the ground, being very organised and putting onto the table something that really needed progress. And hopefully by the end of tomorrow, that progress is still in place. It's a big job. I think most people are feeling a fair bit of despair still, and the challenge in front of us is huge. But there are some fragments of hope, shall we say, and I've been quite inspired to see just the voices of some of the Indigenous communities, the women communities that have really stepped up and stepped into a place to put them at the heart of that.
Great. We'll hold on to the fragments of hope then. Thank you, Claire, coming live from